Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Spaniard Show. This is books number 1505, The Happiest Man on Earth, number 1. And I want to send a quick reminder out. I'm also putting these up on YouTube. So if you're interested in watching this video of me talking about a book, you can go to youtube.com/Charlie Spaniard. And to those of you watching on YouTube, I appreciate you watching. And I fixed my hair for this. So talking about the book, The Happiest Man on Earth, written by Eddie Jaku. Absolutely incredible book, inspirational book. The subtitle is The Beautiful Life of an Auschwitz Survivor. It's a fascinating book. It's not a very long book. If you're watching the video, you can see, it's relatively small. It's one of those reads I wish I could read again for the first time 100 times in a row, because it's that good and inspirational of a book. And when I read books like this, I read for one, to learn about history. He is a Holocaust survivor, an Auschwitz survivor. And I just think it's super important to learn about the past, and especially something like the Holocaust. So anytime I get to read a book about the Holocaust, I always value it for the learning's sake, but also the perspective, gratitude, the fuel for getting through our own obstacles and challenges. The book is called The Happiest Man on Earth. And what Eddie Jaku does is he takes his experience of the Holocaust. And there's a really neat quote that I'll share with you in the second episode of this series on how he sets out to become the happiest man on earth and why he does that. But to give you a little bit of insight into the book and into the author, Eddie Jaku, there's a quote early in the book that says, "I have lived for a century, and I know what it is to stare evil in the face. I have seen the very worst in mankind, the horrors of the death camps, the Nazi efforts to exterminate my life, and the lives of all my people. But I now consider myself the happiest man on earth. I have learned this: life can be beautiful if you make it beautiful." And the book is broken down. There's, I believe, 15 chapters and an epilogue, an intro, 15 chapters, and then an epilogue. And I thought what would be cool is to share the titles of those chapters and then maybe one or two quotes from those chapters, because each chapter is a lesson. The subtitle being The Beautiful Life of an Auschwitz Survivor. And he shares with us his life story, but also lessons that we can take from that life story. So I'm going to go through and read off 8 of the chapter titles / lessons, and then I'll come back through and I'll give you a snippet from each of those chapters. The first one is, there are many things more precious than money. Chapter 2 is, weakness can be turned into hatred. Chapter 3, tomorrow will come if you survive today, one step at a time. And of course, throughout these chapters, he shares his story as they relate to this chapter, these chapter titles. Chapter 4 is, you can find kindness everywhere, even from strangers. Number 5 is, simply hug your mother. That one makes me smile. Number 6, one good friend is my whole world. Chapter 7, education is a lifesaver. And chapter 8, if you lose your morals, you lose yourself. So let's go back through these, and I'll just give you a snippet or two and then some commentary on the chapters. There are many things more precious than money. And this is a lesson that he learned early on from his father. And it's funny when I think, back to when I was a kid and or having my kids now, you tell your kids, or you were told as a kid, certain things that you just don't listen to, you don't pay attention to, you don't believe, you don't whatever. And then later in life, you pick up the phone and call your mom or call your dad or say, man, they were right. You sure were right, Mom. You sure were right, Dad. And of course they know it because it's a cycle. But he shares that story, that learning that lesson early on, that life is not about money. His father says to him when he's young, this is what life is all about, to share your good fortune. He says in the book, a man is worth more than his bank account. So he learned these things early on. And again, he was young, but later in life, throughout this book, he recounts how kind of really actually learning that lesson came to fruition. And things that he talks about repeatedly through the book are the importance of friends, family, and kindness. And I think if you're looking for a life well lived, or a sort of internal peace and happiness, friends, family, and kindness are 3 ways to help us get there. The second chapter, weakness can be turned into hatred. So it's very difficult to read about the Holocaust, and it's very difficult I've read several books on the Holocaust. One that I'm going to recommend here is Ordinary Men. And Ordinary Men is a book about the Holocaust. And essentially, it's about how a group of ordinary men, which in the book, he likens to like a National Guard or maybe a part-time service member, all of a sudden getting wrapped up into the Nazi campaign and then becoming murderers. It's I don't know if fascinating is the right word, because that sounds, I don't know, but it's crazy how that happens. And he talks about in this book how it wasn't just the Nazis that turned against them, and it wasn't just the Nazis that were killing and exterminating and holding these prejudices, but ordinary citizens and friends, ordinary people, maybe his neighbor, maybe the family's neighbors, maybe coworkers. He says it was madness in the true sense of the word. Otherwise, civilized people lost all ability to tell right from wrong. They were scared. Their weakness allowed them to be manipulated into hatred. And to restate that lesson, weakness can be turned into hatred. It's hard to stand up for what you believe in, and it's hard to stand up for what's right when it goes against the majority. But you see the danger of not doing that, as he points out in this lesson and in this book. The next chapter is Tomorrow Will Come If You Survive Today, One Step at a Time. You could use that lesson across life. Any big obstacle, any big challenge, breaking it down, chunking it down, one step at a time. This is a crazy piece of insight. And he mentions this a couple of times throughout the book. It's just crazy to put yourself in this mindset or in this time frame. He says, none of us understood this was only the beginning of the nightmare. So he actually takes us back to his childhood, his youth, moving, coming back home, getting, I guess, captured, getting taken, and then his journey of being prisoner, having some freedom, escaping, like all this back and forth. And at the very beginning, they had no idea. And it's crazy to think that at that time, he and they had no idea what was to come, that the nightmare was just beginning. He says, many saw death as a better alternative. But in the lesson, if I could survive one more day, an hour, a minute, then the pain would end and tomorrow would come. So that's a reminder of day by day, step by step, minute by minute. Number 4, you can find kindness everywhere, even from strangers. So like I said, at various points in his story, he would escape or be on the run or potential escape. And he was on the run in Belgium, and he was walking to France, walking from Belgium to France. And it was 2.5 months of walking. And so he would pass a lot of people. And if, reading the book, I'm putting myself in that environment, understanding that this Nazi campaign was sweeping across Europe and people were getting swept up in it, and you didn't know who was who, and you could be killed or murdered for helping Jewish people or hiding them. So it was just a real unsure and uncertain time. And one of the things he talks about is the villagers along the journey, along that walk. And he says they were willing to share everything they had with me, a stranger and a Jew, risking their lives helping me, and they still did. And again, that lesson meaning you can find kindness everywhere, even from strangers. Number 5, a simple lesson that makes me smile is hug your mother. He was hiding in Brussels with his family. And so I had learned this first in the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger. And he talks about these different wars or places in the world that have these terrible atrocities, bombs and murder and just atrocities. And in the book Tribe, he was saying how, and actually I just heard it on an interview yesterday by a guy named Mike Glover on Rogan's podcast, who was saying that when he was at war, that it was like the best time of his life. And in the book Tribe, Sebastian Junger talks about like people saying even though there were bombs coming day by day, even though our lives were at risk, it was a special time because they were bonded together and bound by this thing. So in this chapter, Hug Your Mother, Eddie Jaku talks about whenever they were in hiding in Brussels. And he says, quote, "I think that this was the best time of my life. We were together. This was all I ever wanted." And that's like a fascinating piece of insight because they're hiding for fear of being murdered or captured. And yet he's saying this was some of the best time of his life. He says, "If you have the opportunity today, please go home and tell your mom how much you love her. Do this for your mother." I shot my mom a text that day and said, "I love you, Mom." And it made her smile. Number 6, one good friend is my whole world. He talks about the importance, obviously, of the kindness from strangers, which I told you about, but also friendship within the concentration camps. And he has a friend named Kurt that he talks about and how they were kind of like, I don't want to say lifelines, but they helped keep each other. They were lifelines. They helped keep each other going. He says, "The most important thing I have ever learned, the greatest thing you will ever do is be loved by another person. Without friendship, a human being is lost." So there's these, like I said, moments and times in the book where he talks about the importance of connection, of helping others, being helped, loving, being loved, and the strength that gave him. And I want to make this abundantly clear. I speak to kids a lot, and a lot of kids feel alone, and depression and anxiety and this aloneness and disconnection is a very real thing. And as I tell the kids during my presentations, there are people who care. So if you watching or listening to this are thinking to yourself, yeah, well, I don't have friends, I don't have anyone who cares. There are people who care. I care. This is like why I do what I do, is because I care. And because I want to be at least one voice that you have in your life to let you know that, hey, someone does care. So if you are feeling like no one cares, I don't have a friend, I want you to know you do have a friend. Number 7, and of course, I love this one. Education is a lifesaver. So so much insight in this book about the Nazis and about concentration camps and the horrible atrocities. Talks about bashing babies' heads, and talks about obviously the torture and the murder and the terrible, quote, games that the Nazi played with the Jewish people. But one of the things that was like a head shaker was Eddie Jaku was labeled an economically indispensable Jew. So basically, he had skills in engineering, mechanical and precision engineering, and he was educated and he studied. So he was labeled an economically indispensable Jew. And he said in the book how Nazis would actually get punished if they hurt him, because the Nazis needed manpower and they needed knowledge and they needed help to move forward their goal. And so Eddie Jaku, through his engineering skills, was able to do that. But I want to say this: if there were any errors in his work, so he was talking about pipes, like connecting pipes or something like that, if any of them leaked, he was murdered. So like there was a very hard line of, yes, you're economically indispensable. We want to use your skills to help us. But at the same time, if you make a mistake, you're dead. It was that real and that crazy. He says, "My education saved my life." His father, when he was young, taught him the value of education. And his father called education your, quote, contribution to the world. I love that. I think it's awesome. I think physical, mental growth and learning is awesome. And it's a huge part of my life. So obviously I am a huge fan of that lesson as well. Number 8, if you lose your morals, you lose yourself. He says, "I never lost sight of what it was to be civilized. I knew that there would be no point surviving if I had to become an evil man to do it." So there were these things, these people called capos. And capos were Jewish people in the concentration camp who would turn against other Jewish people to help the Nazis in exchange for being treated better. And that's a horrible thing. And he talks about that in the book. He says, there is no medicine for your morals. If your morals are gone, you go. Not always an easy book to read, but I feel like a necessary book to read, and certainly a topic that I very much value learning about, and that is the Holocaust, reading stories like this, The Happiest Man on Earth. So I'm going to finish this episode, part 1 of the series, with those 8 lessons, and then I'll pick it up next week with the next several lessons. But I want to thank you all for tuning in, for listening, for watching. My website is charliespaniard.com. All the links are below, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening via your podcast app. We are The Spaniard Show. I encourage you to listen, subscribe. Again, you can subscribe on YouTube. I'll be putting up these videos more and more. Absolutely fascinating book. You can purchase it below in the show notes. Well, thank you all for tuning in, and I hope